Good morning, church. It is good for us to be together here this morning. I'm excited as we continue this series. We are continuing with our series titled Jesus, a Story from Mark. But before we dive into that, let's bow in a word of prayer. Father in heaven, you are faithful, and your love endures forever. God, we are very humbled to be in this moment. Father, humbled to know that you listen to us, that you listen to our prayers. And Father, it is our plea this morning that you would speak to us in our broken places. Father, that you would communicate through your word into our broken life, into our broken existence. Father, that the scriptures would come alive to us. And Father, that these words that were written so many years ago would find application and relevance in our life today. God, that we do not open up this book to study dead words, but we open it up with confidence knowing that this is the living Word of God. Father, it is our plea this morning that you would be with the speaker, for his sins are many. Father, may he not get in the way of your perfect message. Father, anything that is of him, may it fall away like the chaff. But Father, anything that is of your Spirit, Father, that is of you, may it stick to the hearts of your people this morning. And Father, if we have someone in our midst that is an unbeliever, Father, someone who is questioning, doubting, God, it's my prayer that this morning our time together would cause them to question and ask and explore who you are in deeper ways. Father, this is our plea. We love you. We thank you. It is in your Son's precious and holy name we pray, and the church said, Amen. So this morning we are diving into two stories that might be a little bit more to you, might hit a little closer to home for you than you would have ever originally expected. But before we dive into those stories, I want to tell you a little bit about Josh Ross. Josh Ross is a minister down in Memphis, Tennessee, and he writes a book titled Scarred Faith. It's a really small book, and in that book he tells of one February day where he received a phone call that his sister was going to the hospital. A couple days earlier, he had received a text from her saying that her fever was 105, and in the book he'll say that the Ross family doesn't get sick, but when they do get sick, do they ever get sick? And so it wasn't unusual for his sister to run a temperature that high, especially when being ill. And so he didn't think much of it. But then the day in the hospital turned into 2 days. And then it turned into a week. She had group A strep, and her body went septic. Day after day, the family had to start making hard decisions. He writes in the book that they thought the hardest day was when they had to make the decision that they needed to remove both of her legs for the sake of her body. Her body was fighting so hard to protect her internal organs. And then they made the decision to remove her fingers. But they would take his sister without fingers and feet. The doctors told them that there was better chance for her to get struck by lightning twice than for the septic to make its way to her brain. But then 17 days later, the doctors invited the family in and told them the unfortunate news that she was not going to make it. 18 days after a phone call that Josh says he thought was nothing. They said goodbye to his sister. Tears streaming down their face, they kissed her and hugged her body and made their way out to the hallway. Maybe you've been in a moment like that. A moment when there are just not enough tears to cry. A moment where that pit in your stomach goes even deeper. You begin to feel sick to your stomach, nauseated at just the thought of the reality that is unfolding before you. It's a moment that's surreal. A moment when your mind is rushing. Am I just dreaming all of this, or is this really happening? Looking at that loved one that is ill, dealing with that person that isn't going to make it, having the doctors come in and tell you that it's only a matter of time. We are familiar with the feeling of hopelessness. We're familiar with the spot where hope has died. I know this feeling in funny ways and in more serious ways. The 1997 World Series, the Cleveland Indians were facing the Florida Marlins. My dad let me stay up late that night. I was so sure that my Indians were going to win the World Series to end the curse that is the mistake on the lake. And then Charles Nagy gave up that fateful hit right up dead middle, and in that moment, all hope was lost. My heart sank. I began to cry, and my dad told me that one day we'll make it there again. We haven't yet, Dad, but... Maybe you look at me and you say, well, that's a stupid. Yeah, it is. Maybe I'll tell you about another moment. When I walked in the hospital and I'm looking down at this little baby, I look up at her mom and her dad. It's not my child. It's in this little incubator-looking thing. They've been told they only have so long to appreciate the life that she's carried for 9 months. I look down at this beautiful baby, and I can feel it in my stomach again. Looking at these parents, them looking for answers, that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of wondering if God cares. We are familiar with moments like that. But it's not just in death that we feel hopeless. I remember talking with my cousin Carrie. She was making her way through her disease. She has MS. And she said, sometimes I just don't want to live. And I felt it. I felt it. All of a sudden, the bottom dropped out again. I went there just to visit. I went there just to hang out. I went there just to try to put a smile on her face. And then she drops this reality on me, and all of a sudden, There is no bottom to the pit I'm diving into. These surreal moments that strip away hope. It doesn't have to be death. It could be that time when you find out about that disease, that moment when you figure out that your child is going and they're not coming back. We are familiar with hopeless moments. And that's the topic that Jesus finds himself walking into in Mark chapter 5, starting in the portion of text that Tim read for us. In that portion of text, Jesus is making his way across the Sea of Galilee. He's returning back to a place that people know him quite well. Actually, in chapter 1, you find out that Jesus performs a miracle on a man with an unclean spirit, and it says that his fame spread at once across the whole region. Jesus shows up to this place and people surround him, and in the midst of these people we find there's a ruler of a synagogue that has come into Jesus' presence. And there's one thing that this man desires. There's one thing that has brought him to Jesus' feet, and that one thing is his beautiful baby girl. 12 years of age, as we'll find out later in the text. She has some type of sickness that is about to take her life. It has to be near death for her, because we find out later in verse 35 that in the midst of him traveling to go to get Jesus, this little girl has died. He rushes up to Jesus, and I love the imagery that Mark paints, because he takes us there. He doesn't just tell a story, he takes us there. He fills it with emotional language, starting in verse 22. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death." I don't know about you, but that sounds like it would be my story if my little girl was at the point of death. Dustin and I were talking earlier this morning, and he was saying if Catherine was sick, he would go to any place to find any doctor that could possibly heal his bride-to-be. When I was sick, when I was little, my mom and dad, they went to all the different doctors trying to find who could help their baby boy, and they even started exploring in alternative medicines, like, hey, anything that will work. You know, we find ourselves when pressed, when our back is up against the wall, we will do anything for our loved ones. Can I get an amen to that? Amen. I mean, we will go to extremes to protect our kids. We will go to extremes to protect our loved ones. We don't know if Jairus is a believer in Jesus, as in a disciple of Jesus, but this we know, this man's back is up against the wall, and he knows of a man that performs miracles. And so he's willing to try anything to save his little girl that is about to die. And so it says he falls at his feet. And he implores, he asks, he begs earnestly that you would just come and touch my daughter, that she would be healed, because all I want is for her to be okay. And some of you are familiar with that feeling with loved ones. Jesus leaves the crowd. It's a beautiful picture of Jesus. He's surrounded by these people, and yet he wants to meet the needs of this man. He starts to make his way, finding his way, following this man to his house. It's this crowd of people that keep on getting in the way. Jesus is like a rock star of the day, and people are pressing. All they want to do is to be close to him. People are reaching out, touching him. He's this great teacher. He's this miracle worker. If you've ever seen a celebrity walk down the street, they can't even make their way down the sidewalk. People are pressing in around them, and this is the scene that we have at the end of verse 24. A great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And then in the middle of this story, you have a second story. Starting in verse 25, we meet someone that has nothing to do with the story that Mark has originally taken us into. This woman that is unclean, that has been bleeding for 12 years, comes to Jesus. Here's what the text says, starting in verse 25. And there was a woman who has had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. This woman is pressing through the crowd. She's trying to make her way through the group of people. She's making her way, trying to move and press and finally get her way to Jesus. And all she wants to do, all she has in mind is if I can just reach out and touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed. She has this much hope. She has this much faith in this man that she's heard about. And so she reaches out and just touches it. And don't you know, the blood stops. This woman was an outsider her whole life. She was ceremonially unclean. That meant that anyone that touched her, anyone that sat in her chair, anyone that associated with her, they were ceremonially unclean. This is why this woman is in desperate need to get around Jesus, because not only is there pain and suffering, but there's also isolation. She's tried everything for 12 years. 12 years. So she's desperate. She's exhausted all of her options. She's went to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor. I was talking with a sister this last week that said she has been to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor. And still she has pain. There's nothing they can do. I was talking with one of the brothers in the church this last week, and he was saying he went to a doctor to try to help him, and things got worse. This is this woman's story. She reaches out and touches Jesus, and immediately the blood stops. In this moment, Jesus is walking in this crowd, and he feels power leave him. And so he turns and he says to the disciples, "Who touched me?" And the disciples, they get a little sarcastic, and they're like, "Bro, look around you. Who hasn't touched you right now? Everyone's touching you. There's a great crowd of people around you." The woman makes her way back to Jesus. Verse 32, it says, "And he looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she felt her healing, came in fear and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.'" Now, if you're a skeptic here this morning, you were probably expecting Jesus to do something. I mean, this is the Bible, right? Jesus always wins. Jesus always turns the story around. I mean, that's what Jesus does. But for a second, I would like for all of us just to imagine how extreme this would be. How crazy this scenario would be that Jesus would offer this healing, and he didn't even necessarily bless her in this moment. She just touches the fringe of his garment. We actually find later in Mark chapter 6, that people are just reaching out trying to touch Jesus and they're being healed. This is what happens in the presence of Jesus. He offers healing. And yet, just for a second, I want you to turn your eyes away from this woman that has caught all of our attention and look back at Jairus' face. Remember where they were originally going? His daughter is dying. What is going through Jairus' mind as Jesus starts this conversation? Is he tapping his foot? Is he wondering in his mind, can't this wait? Can't this wait? My daughter is dying. Can't this wait? This woman's offered healing. That's great. Do we need to have a conversation about it? And just as Jesus finishes this conversation with this woman, Jairus, who's been trying most likely, hey, my daughter is dying. Remember, come on, let's go. I don't know how much time she has. News breaks. People from the house come back and they say, hey, Jairus, you don't have to bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Verse 35. And immediately, Jairus' heart knows the feeling of hopelessness. This woman has been healed, and that's fantastic, but his daughter is dead. And so there's nothing left to do, because in his mind, Jesus is a teacher. And teachers don't bring people back from the dead. Miracle workers don't bring people back from the dead. We've talked about this before at the Alliance Church. Death wins, period. The bottom falls out. The ball goes right up the middle. The baby is told that it's not going to survive, and the parents get that disheartened, broken look on their face. This is the spot that Jairus finds himself in. And so the comment is, don't bother the teacher anymore. And then Jesus offers an alternative path. And I want you to catch this. One voice speaks in this moment of despair, and it says, don't bother with Jesus anymore. And then Jesus speaks in this moment, verse 36, but overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, catch this, do not fear, only believe. Two voices speak into Jairus' life in this gut-wrenching moment. Don't bother with Jesus anymore. Don't fear, only believe. And I would suggest to you today, in the midst of despair, in the midst of hopeless situations, we are offered two paths. Don't bother with Jesus anymore. Do not fear, only believe. In a spot where we are blind to see what's going to happen, when it seems like all hope is lost, when death has won, when evil has won, that there are two paths that we could walk down, two life choices that we could walk down. Don't bother with Jesus anymore. There's nothing more he can offer you. Or don't fear. Believe. I can't imagine Jesus was hard with Jairus. Do not fear. Only believe. He knows what death is going to taste like. He's going to take it on himself. And Jairus, in this moment, what else does he really have to lose? See, the idea of belief here, I think for Jairus is more a comment of trust. Jairus is just going to trust Jesus, even though he's not sure if Jesus can completely perform what he's about to perform. So Jesus goes back to the house. They take him. He takes 3 disciples with him. And as they make their way to the house, people are mourning and crying. And Jesus makes the comment. He says down in verse 39, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they start laughing. Jesus sends them out of the room. He takes the mother, the father, the disciples into this small room, and he comes over to this girl that is dead. She is dead. She's not just sleeping. She is dead. And Jesus says these words, "Talitha Kumi." Now, everyone here is an Aramaic scholar, so I know you know these words. Well, it's thankful that the translators have translated it for us. "Little girl, I say to you, arise." But we don't have the background of that phrase. That phrase was an endearing phrase. Talitha was an idea of this little girl, but it was also something kind of gave the connotation of sweetheart. And the way Jesus says this would be as casual as Tim walking in, seeing his daughter sleeping and saying, "Sweetheart, wake up." And the girl gets up. Church, you hear me? The girl gets up. I know this is crazy to believe, but this girl who is dead, Jesus says, hey, sweetheart, wake up. And she gets up. She actually gets something to eat. The girl's probably like, "Hey, can I get some Burger King or something? I'm famished." And it says, and immediately the girl got up, verse 42, walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement, wonder. How could this be? They were amazed at what Jesus had just done. I want to offer 2 quick points real fast before we really dive back into the heart of this lesson. One is a reminder of how easy it is to take one path over another. These men come back and they've seen this girl dead, and they say, do not trouble the teacher anymore. Don't bother with Jesus anymore. And then there's an alternative path that Jesus offers, and that is, don't fear, only believe. The question for you is, in the midst of your doubts, can you trust Jesus enough to follow him down the path a little bit farther? I know it's dark. I know you can't see. But in the midst of hopeless situations, when everything else says turn away, can you trust Jesus just enough to walk with him hand in hand? The second thing I really want to quickly point out is, how old was the little girl that passed away? How long had the woman had this bleeding? 12 years. I think God works this out in a very beautiful way, that this woman has been suffering for 12 years. She's been dealing with this burden for 12 years. And then when you get to this girl, she's died at 12 years. This moment when Jairus could be completely involved in his own life and dismissive of this woman's problem. It's the same amount of years that have passed that this woman has been dealing with this bleeding. And now the age to which his daughter's going to die. Blows my mind how easily we as people get so involved in our own situation, and we even neglect the pain of others, even in our sorrow. And I get it. It's an emotional response. We tune people out, and we're just like, my life is all important. My family's all important. But there are other people hurting in the world too. All right, back from our commercial break, back to the main meat. What were you expecting out of this story? Weren't you expecting Jesus to heal this girl? I was. I went to Bible school. I was expecting Jesus to come in and he's like, hey, get up. And the little girl gets up and everyone's like, yay, Jesus. Jesus is awesome. Jesus is great. And yet here's my struggle this morning. Easter was last week. Some Christian faiths are celebrating Easter this week. And Easter, for a number of Christians, is this remembrance that Jesus rises from the dead, that he is resurrected. But how do we live in a world where Jesus is resurrected and we're still putting others in the grave? At the very beginning of this lesson, I made a reference to Josh Ross. And he said one of the most difficult things for him in the midst of the sorrow, in the midst of burying his sister, is the question of, I know that Jesus is resurrected, but my sister's tomb is still full. Jesus' tomb is empty and my sister's tomb is full. And as Christians, we run in the tension that those two realities bear out. Sunday after Sunday, I speak about hope. I speak about life. I speak about God working in broken people and in broken situations. I share stories. We share stories of miracles happening. And then we come back together and we look at a sister who's been struggling for 20 years. And it seems like God hasn't answered her prayer. We pray over loved ones that we cherish deeply. They're not getting better, but they're getting worse. We walk into a hospital room and we look at this scenario of a dear loved one laying there in the bed. And the doctor comes and says, when you guys get a minute, I need to talk with the whole family. We know what it's like to live in hopeless situations. Situations that consume us, situations that bog us down, situations that grab a hold of our heart. We talked about this last week in fear, how it sets up residence in our life and it commands our obedience. It calls us to faithfulness, that we would fall into a corner and shiver, that we would tuck back away from reality and we would live in this existence of just, my life is so bad. And that starts to hit to your emotional core and you just feel defeated. Out in the hallway, Josh said he was standing up against the wall, tears streaming down his face. Not saying much. I mean, he's a preacher. He's supposed to be saying something right now. But what is there to say? Death is won again. He said his mother, this little woman, walks up to her husband, this very big man. This man who's battled with self-esteem issues and alcohol problems for a large majority of his adult life. A man who had come to faith only to begin preaching. And she walks over to him, this mountain of a man, and she grabs his face. And she says, "Remind me what we believe. Remind me what we believe." And her husband looked at her and said 4 words that Josh said began to take him down a path. And here were the 4 words. The tomb is empty. The tomb is empty. I'm going to speak to you if you're having issues in your life, if you've been in those moments where prayers don't seem to be answered, and you're looking at this story and you're like, man, that sounds ideal. I would love for Jesus to come in my life and offer healing. I would love for Jesus to come in that situation where my loved one passed away and automatically they're back alive. But just to speak a little bit of reality in this moment, one is that eventually this young girl, she's going to die again. Two, this girl that was sick, that was ill, that was bleeding, eventually, if she lives long enough, her body will start deteriorating. It's what happens in age, at least that's what they tell me. I think the story here is not so much about us finding our hope in this life as it is pointing to the next life. Now, with that said, I believe in a God that performs miracles. Can I get an amen? Amen. I believe in a God that works in crazy situations and finds himself redeeming broken scenarios. I believe in a God that has answered our prayers at times and at other times leaves us waiting. Waiting like this girl that has been bleeding for 12 years. Waiting like Jairus tapping his foot. Waiting for Jesus to show up to his daughter, only to be late. I don't know why God makes us wait sometimes. I don't know why he would make you wait. But I think I might be starting to get a glimpse of it. At the end of this story, Jesus offers his healing. And it says that people are amazed. They're amazed. There's this healing and people are amazed. See, here's what I think Jesus cares most about. The glory of God. Remember in John chapter 9, there's this blind man and Jesus' disciples are like, hey, Jesus, who sinned? This man or his parents? And Jesus says something that is super radical. He says, neither, but this was done so that the glory of God might be demonstrated. And it's like, man, God sounds really egotistical there. But in this moment, thousands upon thousands of people have come to faith because of this man's healing. Thousands upon thousands of people have come to even greater faith because of his willingness to leave everything and follow Jesus. See, I think this is the call of Matthew chapter 5, or Mark chapter 5, 21, going on down to verse 41. And it's that the tomb is empty. And it changes everything. Everything changes. And so you can deal with pain and sorrow in a different way because you know that one day, though your body might meet the grave, it will not stay there. That in this life, storms and trials will come, but guess what? The God that you have in your life, he is bigger than the storms in your life. That he can take your difficulties, your issues, and at the end of the story, whenever that is, whether it's healing or whether you stay sick, whether it's the person lives or the person dies, I know this is such a difficult teaching, but that God can use all things for his glory. That we know in all things God is working together for good of those who love him. And so I've told you this story. This will be the last thing I mention. Of the young girl who passed away. Her mom and her dad lifted up prayers, questions. They talked with God. They were asking God, why did this happen? Why did this happen? She was an organ donor, and so her organs were sent out all over the country. And a little girl in Arizona got her heart. This little girl's family contacted this mother and her father. They actually had her come out and spend some time with this family. Whose prayer was answered? Whose prayer was answered? Did God forget about the family whose daughter was killed? Did he care more about the family whose daughter got to live than he did the family who lost a loved one? Church, there is a bigger picture at play here. There's a bigger story at play here, bigger than any single one of us can wrap our minds around. And sometimes we invitation into this moment where we get to step back and we see the larger picture and we can see how things are unfolding. And then sometimes we are so close in the midst of these emotional situations that we can't see anything else. But let me offer you this one true fact that will offer you hope and hopefully strength in whatever trial and circumstance that you encounter. This is what we believe in. The tomb is empty. Everything changes. The way I deal with sorrow, the way I deal with pain, those gut-wrenching moments when God tells me that I need to wait. God is working, and he's working for our good.